There is a reason myths survive the centuries. They are not just stories, not just dusty words preserved in books or carved into stone. They are the deep, slow heartbeat of our ancestors. The way they explained the unexplainable, remembered the unforgettable, and sometimes, let's be honest, exaggerated the mundane into something worth retelling around the fire. A myth is a place where gods walk among storms, where oceans are carved from the bones of giants, and where the sun might vanish simply because a wolf got hungry. It's not exactly the news you'd trust for your morning commute, but it is the kind of truth that lives in the marrow of a people, and tonight will sink into one of the great ones, the sweeping, strange, and strangely human saga of the Norse gods. This is the story of how the world began, how it will end, and everything in between. The beauty, the mischief, the sacrifices, and the fights so large they echo into the next age. It is, in its way, the Norse version of a family drama, just with more ice, more axes, and slightly larger pets. If you're new here, you might want to gently press that like button and subscribe, so that these stories can find you again when you're ready for another night's wandering. And, before you settle in too deeply, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? What time is it for you? And which part of tonight's myth ends up being your favorite? Now, let's ease into tonight's myth. Before anything existed, there was Gnangop, an endless yawning void. Not empty in the lonely way you might imagine a bare room, but empty like a canvas, waiting for the first brushstroke. To the south, burned Muspellsheim, a land of relentless fire and molten rivers. To the north lay Niflheim, a realm of biting frost and glaciers older than time itself. The mists of Niflheim drifted into the void, curling and folding until they met the shimmering heat of Muspellheim. Here, at this border where opposites touched, the ice began to drip and melt. From the mingling of fire and frost came the first stirrings of life, and there he was, Ymir, the first giant. His size was the size of landscapes, his breath a winter gale, his body a living echo of the void's strange meeting of elements. Not long after came out Humla, the great cosmic cow, her milk flowing in 4 rivers that nourished Ymir. She licked at the salty ice for her own food, each stroke of her tongue revealing something trapped inside. Over days, a figure emerged, hair first, then a face, then the rest of a tall, strong man. This was Buri, ancestor of the gods, the first shape of something that would guide the chaos toward order. Ymir, for his part, was not content to exist alone. From his own body came more giants, the Jotun, loud, strong, and destined for conflict. Buri took a giantess as a partner, and their child Buro married Bestla. From Buro and Bestla came Odin Vili and Vili, and Vi brothers with the eyes of builders and the restlessness of those who will not let the world sit still. And one day they looked at Ymir and saw not just a giant, but the beginning of everything that could be made from him. It is a strange thing, deciding that the only way forward is through the destruction of what came before. Odin, Vili, and Vi were not cruel for cruelty's sake, but they had a vision, and in that vision, Ymir was both the first living thing and the greatest obstacle to the world they wished to build. The brothers acted with the resolve of those who know there is no turning back. They struck, and Ymir fell. His cry rolled across Ginnungagap like a storm front, rattling even the cold. Patience of Niflheim. From his wounds poured rivers of blood, more than the mind can hold, flooding the void and drowning nearly all of the Jotun. Only a few clung to life, carried away to distant corners of the cosmos, where they would brood and plot their memory. Of this day burning as bright as Muspellheim's flames, the brothers set to work. Their tools, not chisels or saws, but the will to create. Ymir's blood became the oceans, dark and restless, their surfaces breathing with wind. His flesh was pressed and stretched into the land, rising into plains and hills. His bones became mountains, silent and enduring. Even his teeth and shattered bone fragments found purpose, scattered into the shapes of crags and cliffs. His skull, vast and domed, was lifted high and placed as the very ceiling of the world. To hold it in place, they summoned for dwarves, Nori, Suri, Ostri, and Vestri, each standing at a corner of the sky, steady and tireless. Within Ymir's flesh there had been small, crawling things, larvae, insignificant in the beginning. But the gods took them and shaped them into dwarves, short in stature, long in skill, with hands that could coax beauty and strength from the stubbornest of stone and metal. They made their homes deep within the earth, their forges echoing in the dark. The brothers then reached for Muspellheim once more, gathering sparks and flinging them into the heavens. They caught fire there, becoming stars, scattered, glimmering markers of night. The sun and moon were given paths to follow, drawn by swift horses, their pace set not by leisure, but by the wolves forever chasing them. In time, the gods built Asgard, their own realm, bright, strong, and looking out over Midgard, the place they would soon gift to humankind. Between the two, they laid the bifrost, a rainbow bridge burning faintly with the heat of its own magic, a path for gods but perilous for others. And then, on the shore where water kissed new-made earth, they found two fallen logs, one of ash, one of elm. It was here their work took its most delicate turn. Odin leaned close and breathed life into them. Vili gave them thought, the quiet spark of will. Va shaped their bodies, carving eyes that could see, ears that could listen, and a mouth that could speak. The man was named Ask, the woman Embla. They stood together, tasting the air, the sea's salt still clinging to them. Around them stretched Midgard, sheltered by the curve of Ymir's own eyebrows, fashioned into a protective wall. From this moment, humankind lived under the gaze of the gods, small, fragile, but alive in a way that even the giants could not match. Above, the stars burned softly. Below, the oceans murmured against the land. And for a little while, the 9 realms were at peace. Peace, as always, did not mean contentment. Odin, ruler of Asgard, stood at the heart of a shining new world and still felt the hollowness of what he did not know. Creation was one thing, ruling wisely was another, and wisdom, the true kind, that sees beyond the present moment, is never free. So Odin left the safety of Asgard and wandered into Jotunheim, land of the giants. He walked in the guise of a traveller, his cloak wrapped against the wind, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. Giants were not in the habit of welcoming Aesir with open arms, but Odin's purpose was not for their approval. He sought only one being, Mimir, his ancient uncle, who lived beside the well of knowledge. The well was said to drink from the roots of Yggdrasil itself, the great ash tree that held all worlds together. Its waters fed on deep secrets, on the quiet truths that lie beneath the surface of things. Mimir drank from it each day, and his mind had grown into something sharp, enough to see both past and future in a single glance. Odin approached the well and made his request to drink from its waters, to let them fill his mind. Mimir listened and then shook his head. "The water is not given," he said. "It is bought. The price is high." Your eye. It was the sort of bargain one might expect to think over. But Odin did not waver. Slowly, without flinching, he took a blade and gouged out his own eye. He dropped it into the well, where it sank and vanished into the depths, the ripples spreading outward like the echo of his decision. The cry he let out was not of pain alone. It was the sound of a man who had traded part of himself for something greater. The sound of resolve ringing through the roots of the world. Satisfied, Mimir dipped a horn into the well and handed it to him. Odin drank deeply, and as the cold water slid into him, his mind expanded. He saw farther, thought deeper, and understood the delicate strands that wove fate together. When he returned to Asgard, one eye blazed like a quiet flame, the other an empty shadow beneath his brow. From then on, he was called the One-Eyed God, the keeper of hard-earned wisdom, a reminder that some knowledge is worth the cost, even when the cost follows you forever. But wisdom alone could not protect Asgard. The gods had walls, yes, but not walls worthy of the realm they guarded. And so it happened that a stranger came to their gates, a builder of great strength, and offered to raise a wall so high and so strong that no enemy could breach it. He named his price with the casual boldness of someone who thinks they will not be taken seriously: the goddess Freya, the sun and the moon. The gods laughed, or at least most of them did. The bargain seemed impossible. The builder claimed he could finish the wall in a single year, and Loki, ever quick to see an angle, convinced the others to accept the terms. With one condition: he must work alone, without help from any man. The builder agreed, though he asked to use his horse, Svadilfari, to haul the stone. The work began, and at first the gods were confident. But Svadilfari was no ordinary horse. Tireless and powerful, it hauled stones day and night, and the wall rose far faster than anyone had expected. Winter deepened, the days shortened, and the wall was almost complete. The gods began to realize that they had been outwitted. Fury turned toward Loki. This had been his suggestion, his smug assurance that the task could not be done. Now it was Loki who had to fix it. He vanished for a time, and when he returned, it was not in his usual form. He had transformed into a mare, sleek, beautiful, and enticing. That night, when Svadilfari went out to work, the mare called to him. The stallion gave chase, and the two vanished into the dark. Without his horse, the builder could not finish the wall in time. His true nature as a giant was revealed, and Thor, with little ceremony, brought Mjolnir down upon his head, ending the matter with the efficiency of a hammer meeting a nail. Some months later, Loki returned, still himself, but leading a remarkable colt. It had 8 legs, and its strength and speed were unmatched. This was Sleipnir, and Loki presented him to Odin as a gift. The wall stood completed, the bargain broken, and the gods had gained not only their defenses, but the finest steed in the 9 realms. For a time, Asgard stood strong and untroubled behind its new wall. But peace in the 9 realms is never more than a pause between storms. Tension had been growing between the Aesir gods of war, power, and rule, and the Vanir gods of fertility, sea, and harvest. It was a tension born of difference, of mistrust, and perhaps of the fact that each side thought the other just a bit too pleased with themselves. The breaking point came with a woman named Gullveig. She was of the Vanir, skilled in cider magic, and gifted or cursed, with a love for gold so great it seemed to glow in her very eyes. She came to Asgard, and the Aesir saw in her both beauty and danger. 3 times they tried to burn her, and 3 times she stepped from the fire reborn, untouched. This resilience did not inspire respect. It inspired rage. The Vanir saw the Aesir's treatment of Gullveig and decided they had seen enough. They gathered their strength and marched toward Asgard. Odin, seeing their advance, hurled his spear over their heads, the ancient signal that war had begun. The first great war of the gods raged. The Vanir broke part of Asgard's mighty wall. The Aesir struck back with fire and steel, and yet, for all the destruction, neither side could claim victory. The battles blurred into a stalemate, the kind that could last 1,000 years and leave nothing but ash behind. Finally, both sides saw sense, or perhaps they simply grew tired of losing without winning. A truce was agreed upon, sealed by a hostage exchange. From Asgard went Fenrir, a tall, handsome god, and Mimir, the keeper of great wisdom. From Vanaheim came Nidhogg, god of the sea and wind, and his children, Frey and Freya. It seemed fair enough, until the Vanir realized Fenrir was less a leader and more a man who looked the part, relying entirely on Mimir's counsel. When Mimir was absent, Fenrir sat silent, unable to act. Feeling cheated, the Vanir beheaded Mimir and sent his head back to Odin. Grief and fury mingled in the Allfather's heart, but he did not waste the gift that remained. With his magic, Odin preserved Mimir's head, whispering spells until it could speak again. And so Mimir's wisdom remained, a quiet voice Odin could consult in times of need. The war was over, but the mistrust lingered. The Vanir gods who came to Asgard stayed there, becoming part of the pantheon. The balance between them would hold for now, like a truce between neighbors who still keep their fences very high. The peace was fragile, but Loki seemed to find it unbearably dull. Mischief, for him, was not so much a habit as a compulsion. One day, for reasons known only to his restless mind, he crept into the chamber of Sif Thor's wife and cut off her long golden hair while she slept. When Sif awoke and found her head bare, her fury was matched only by Thor's. The god of thunder stormed through Asgard, found Loki, and threatened to break every bone in his body unless he made amends. Loki, with the slippery grace of a man well practiced in talking himself out of trouble, promised to set things right. He journeyed to Svartalfheim realm of the dwarves, those tireless craftsmen who could turn raw ore into wonders. Loki went first to the sons of Ivaldi and persuaded them to create 3 gifts for the gods. They made new hair for Sif, spun from gold and enchanted to grow like living strands. Odin's spear, Gungnir, which could pierce anything, and a ship for Frey, Skidbladnir, that could fold up small enough to fit into a pocket and yet carry all the gods across any sea. But Loki, never content with one scheme, made a wager with 2 other dwarf brothers, Brokkr and Sindri, called Eitri in some tales. He bet his head that they could not make gifts to rival the first set. The brothers accepted, setting to work at their forge. Loki, unwilling to lose, transformed into a biting mosquito and stung Brokkr at the bellows, once on the hand, then on the neck, and finally, in desperation, on the eyelid. Brokkr flinched only once, and that moment changed the course of their work. Still, their creations were remarkable. They made Draupnir a golden arm ring for Odin that produced new rings every 8 nights. Gullinbursti, a golden boar for Frey whose bristles shone in darkness. And Mjolnir, the hammer for Thor, unbreakable, unfailing, and able to return to its wielder's hand. The only flaw was its short handle, a result of Loki's interference. The gods judged Mjolnir the greatest of all gifts, for it would protect Asgard from the giants. Brokra demanded Loki's head, but the trickster wriggled free with a technicality. The wager was for his head, not his neck, and one could not be removed without harming the other. Odin forbade further quarrel, but Brok took some satisfaction in sewing Loki's mouth shut. For a time, Asgard was blessedly quiet. Thor was not known for subtlety, but even he sometimes set out on journeys that began with more curiosity than thunder. One such trip took him, Loki, and Thor's servant, Thialfi, into Jotunheim, the land of giants. They traveled long, and when night came, they found what seemed to be an enormous cave. The air inside was cold and still, and they made camp in its shadows. But as the light of dawn crept in, they discovered that the cave was no cave at all. It was the thumb of a glove, and the walls were the folds of its leather. The glove belonged to Skrymir, a sleeping giant whose size made Thor feel, if only for a moment, unusually small. When Skrymir awoke, he offered to guide them, and the group travelled on. At night, Thor tried to strike the giant while he slept, bringing Mjolnir down with all his strength. The blow landed, but Skrymir stirred only slightly, mumbling that perhaps a leaf had fallen on his head. Thor tried twice more, with the same result, and each time, Skrymir merely shifted and muttered about insects or small twigs. Eventually, the giant led them to his king, Loki, whose palace rose high into the clouds. Here, Thor and his companions were given challenges, each meant to test them. Loki entered an eating contest against a giant named Logi. He ate quickly, but Logi devoured not just the meat, but also the bones, the plates, and the table itself. For Logi, as it turned out, was fire in disguise. Thialfi raced a young giant named Hugi, swift as the wind, but lost every time, for Hugi was thought itself, and nothing outruns it. Thor was given a great drinking horn and told to drain it. He drank deeply 3 times, but the liquid barely lowered. The horn, unknown to him, was connected to the sea, and his effort lowered the tides in Midgard forever. He was then asked to lift Loki's cat, but could manage only to raise one paw. The cat was Jormungandr, the world serpent, coiled in disguise. Finally, Thor was told to wrestle an old woman named Ellie, who easily brought him to his knees. She was old age itself, and no one wins against her for long. When the games ended, Loki revealed his illusions. Skrymir had been him all along, and each blow of Mjolnir had struck mountains, carving valleys into the earth. He praised their efforts, but when Thor reached for his hammer, Loki vanished with his haul, unwilling to test whether the illusions would hold a second time. Another day, Thor awoke to a far less subtle problem. Mjolnir was gone. Without his hammer, Asgard was vulnerable, and giants would know it. It did not take long for word to arrive from Thrym, a giant who announced that he had the hammer and would return it only in exchange for Freya's hand in marriage. The gods gathered in council, and their outrage was as much about the insult as the threat. Freya's answer was swift and loud, no. Yet without Mjolnir, their defenses were broken. Loki, as usual, proposed a solution that was both absurd and somehow convincing. Thor, he said, would disguise himself as Freya, veil and all, and Loki would play the role of her servant. Thor resisted. The god of thunder was not fond of silk and pearls, but the alternative was unthinkable. Soon he was dressed in bridal finery, his beard tucked beneath a veil, and they set out for Thrym's hall. The wedding feast began, and Thor, in his disguise, ate and drank enough for 3 men. Thrym, suspicious, was told by Loki that the bride had not eaten for 8 days out of eagerness to wed him. When Thrym tried to lift the veil for a kiss, Thor's eyes burned like lightning. Loki explained that it was simply the joy of seeing her husband -2-be at last. Thrym ordered Mjolnir brought to bless the marriage. The moment it touched Freya's lap, Thor's hands closed around it. In a heartbeat, the disguise was forgotten, and Mjolnir swung. Thrym's skull was shattered, and the hall was cleared with the efficiency only the god of thunder could manage. When Thor returned to Asgard, his dress was quickly discarded, his hammer restored, and the whole affair filed away as something to be remembered, and not often mentioned. Odin's gaze was long and deep, and sometimes it turned toward the future. In one such vision, he saw a battle unlike any other ragnarok, and in it he saw the jaws of a wolf so vast they could swallow the sky. That wolf belonged to none other than Loki. Loki, pressed for the truth, admitted that in Jotunheim with the giantess Angerboda, he had 3 children, not the kind you could take to the market without causing alarm. The first was Hel, half a beautiful woman, half a corpse in decay. Her face could shift from kindness to dread in a blink. The second was Jormungandr, a serpent so large that even as a youngling it could crush a man with its coils. And the third, Fenrir, a wolf cub with eyes far too intelligent for comfort. The gods acted quickly. Odin threw Jormungandr into the deep ocean encircling Midgard, where it grew and grew until it bit its own tail, encircling the world. Hel, with her unsettling beauty, was sent to rule over Helheim, the realm of the dead who had not died in battle. But Fenrir was brought to Asgard. At first, he was small enough to be watched and even, on occasion, scratched behind the ears. Only one god, Tyr, dared feed him, for Fenrir's gaze held a glint of his father's cunning. The cub grew and grew again, and with his size came strength, speed, and a shadow of malice. The gods tried binding him with chains, but Fenrir broke them, easily snapping steel as if it were twine. At last Odin ordered the dwarves to forge something unbreakable. They returned with Sleipnir, a ribbon soft as silk but made from impossible things. The sound of a cat's footsteps, the roots of a mountain, the beard of a woman, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. Fenrir looked at Sleipnir and laughed, or as close as a wolf can laugh. He would only allow himself to be bound if one of the gods placed a hand in his mouth as a token of trust. Tyr stepped forward, wordless, and placed his hand between Fenrir's teeth. The ribbon held, Fenrir strained, twisted, bit at it, but it would not break. Realizing the trick, he snapped his jaws shut, severing Tyr's hand. The wolf's roar of rage shook the air, and his vow to kill Odin one day was not whispered, but promised for all to hear. Bound and howling, Fenrir was fastened to a great rock, left to wait for the end of days. Not long after, Thor found himself in need of something enormous, a cauldron big enough to brew ale for all the gods. The sea god Æsir agreed to host the feast if such a vessel could be found. Tyr remembered that his father, the giant Hamingja, owned one large enough for the task. So Thor and Tyr set out for Hamingja's hall. The visit was not warm. Hamingja, suspicious of guests, and perhaps of his son's choice in friends, tested Thor's strength. First, he challenged him to go fishing for something worthy. Hamingja himself caught a whale, but Thor was not satisfied. He wanted to find Jormungandr. They rowed far into the open sea, where the air grew heavy and the water dark. Thor baited his hook with the head of Hymir's finest bull, a gift not offered but taken. He cast the line deep, and soon the ocean boiled. Something vast pulled against it. The serpent rose, its coils heaving the waves, its head higher than the tallest mast. Jormungandr's eyes locked with Thor's, and for a moment all the world seemed to hold its breath. Thor pulled, muscles straining, ready to bring Mjolnir down and end the serpent's threat forever. But Hymir, pale with terror, saw what would happen if the serpent died in those waters, the chaos it would unleash, and cut the line. The serpent slid back into the depths, leaving only a churn of foam and the echo of its hiss. Thor's fury was sharp and silent. He said nothing to Hymir, though the grip on Mjolnir's handle was tight enough to whiten his knuckles. They returned to shore with the cauldron, the task complete, but the memory of the serpent's rising was not one Thor would let go of easily. Among the gods there was one whose very presence seemed to soften the air, Balder, son of Odin and Frigg. His beauty was not just in the smoothness of his face or the brightness of his hair, but in the way he seemed to carry joy with him wherever he went. Even the most irritable in Asgard could not stay sour for long in his company. But Balder began to dream, and his dreams were dark, visions of his own death, shadows lengthening toward him, a silence waiting at the end. These dreams troubled Frigg deeply. She was no stranger to omens, and in her heart she knew they were not to be ignored. So Frigg set about her task. She went to every corner of the world, speaking to every creature, every element, every metal, stone and sickness, asking them to swear an oath never to harm her son. They all agreed, for who could wish harm on Balder? The gods tested this new invulnerability with the enthusiasm of children discovering that their friend cannot be tagged. They threw spears, hurled stones, even aimed axes at him, and every weapon slid aside, harmless. Balder laughed with them, good-natured and patient. But there was one not laughing. Loki, his cleverness was a restless thing, and in Balder's perfection he saw not charm but an imbalance that begged to be corrected. He disguised himself and sought out Frigg, asking in a casual tone if there was truly nothing in the world that could harm Baldur. Frigg, perhaps proud of her work, mentioned the mistletoe, a small, harmless plant she had not thought worth binding with an oath. Loki's mind began to work. He shaped a dart from the mistletoe and found Hadrabalder's blind brother standing apart during the games. Loki offered to guide his hand so that he, too, could join the fun. Hadr, trusting, agreed. The dart flew, and the laughter stopped. Balder fell, lifeless, the mistletoe lodged in him. For a moment, the world held its breath, and then the morning began, deep, keening, and without end. It was the first true crack in the bright heart of Asgard. The gods were not ready to accept Balder's death. They sent Hermod, swiftest of them all, riding Sleipnir into the shadowed realm of Helheim. Hel, queen of the dead and daughter of Loki, listened to his plea. She agreed to release Balder, but only on one condition, that every living thing in the world weep for him. The gods sent word far and wide, and indeed every being wept. The earth grew damp with grief, and the air felt heavy with it. All but one dot high in the mountains lived a giantess who did not shed a tear. When asked, she said, "Let Hel hold what she has," and that was the end of it. The condition was broken. Balder would not return. It did not take long for the gods to learn that the giantess was none other than Loki in disguise. This was the final straw. His mischief had crossed into cruelty, and they would not let it pass. Loki fled, shifting into many shapes to evade them. At last, he took the form of a salmon and hid in the waters near a quiet pool. But Odin, watching from his high seat, saw him. The gods came with nets, and Loki, sensing the trap, tried to leap away. Thor caught him mid-jump, his hand closing around the fish's slippery tail, and to this day, the salmon's tail is said to be narrow because of that grip. They dragged him to a cave. Here, his punishment was devised. Loki's sons were brought before him. One was slain, and his entrails were used to bind Loki to a rock. The bonds hardened into iron, unbreakable. Above him, the goddess Skadi hung a serpent, its fangs dripping venom toward his face. Sigyn, Loki's wife, stayed by him, holding a bowl to catch the poison. When the bowl filled, she turned to empty it, and, in those moments, the venom fell upon him. His body twisted and convulsed in pain, and the earth trembled with his shuddering. Bound and seething, Loki waited not for rescue, but for the day when the bonds would break and his vengeance could begin. Time in the 9 realms moved as it always had, until the air itself began to change. In Midgard, winter came and did not leave. The snow fell thick and unrelenting, blanketing the land in white silence. One season bled into the next without the mercy of spring. This was Fimbulwinter, 3 long consecutive winters with no summer between. Crops failed, animals perished, and people turned on one another. The hearths still burned in some homes, but not for warmth alone. They burned for survival, for food, for the faint light against the growing dark dot in Asgard. The gods watched. They knew these were the first notes in the song of the end. The prophecies had spoken of wolves chasing the sun and moon, and now Skull and Haughty. The great beasts finally caught their prey. The sun was swallowed whole, the moon torn from the sky. The world dimmed into an eternal dusk. Beneath Yggdrasil, the roots trembled. The great ash tree groaned as earthquakes split the ground. Mountains slid into the sea. The rock that bound Fenrir cracked apart, and the wolf strode free, his eyes burning with the promise he had made long ago. From the ocean depths, Jormungandr stirred, sending waves higher than any ship could ride. His venom spread through the seas, killing all that lived beneath the waves, far below. In the darkness of Helheim, Loki's bonds shattered. The venom-dripped years had not dulled him, they had honed him. He went to his daughter, Hel, and took command of her legions of the dead. Nidhogg, the dragon, gnawed open a path, and the army rose from the earth like a tide of shadows. From the fire realm of Muspellsheim came Star, the black giant, sword blazing brighter than the sun that was no more. Ice giants sailed from it, and the air burned with the heat of approaching ruin. And then the horn Heimdall's Jollahorn. Its sound rolled across all realms, low and long, a note that reached into every hall and home, leaving no doubt ragnarok had begun. They met on the field of Vigrid, a plain so vast it seemed to have no end, now churned into mud by the march of thousands. Odin rode at the head of the Einherjar, the warriors of Valhalla, chosen through centuries of battle. Sleipnir carried him swift as the wind, the 8-legged horse leaping as if the ground itself bent to his will. The clash came like a storm. Freya faced Surtur, the fire giant, without his magic sword, a gift he had given away long ago. They fought fiercely, golden boar against flaming blade, until Surtur's sword struck true, and Freya fell, the first of the gods to die that day. Tyr met Garm, the monstrous wolf of Helheim. And though they wounded each other deeply, neither survived their struggle. Thor sought out Jormungandr, the old enemy he had once tried to pull from the sea. The serpent's venom filled the air in a choking cloud, but Thor's hammer struck again and again until the great coils loosened and Jormungandr lay dead. Thor took only 9 steps before the poison claimed him, and he fell. Fenrir found Odin. The Allfather stood before him, spear in hand, but the wolf's jaws were wide enough to swallow the sky. Sleipnir reared, but it was no use. Fenrir struck, and Odin was gone, swallowed whole. The Idar, Odin's son, came in silence. He wore a thick shoe of stitched leather scraps, and with it, he stepped onto Fenrir's lower jaw, holding it open. With one hand, he gripped the upper jaw and wrenched it back, tearing the beast apart. Elsewhere, Loki and Heimdall met in single combat. They fought with the grim precision of those who had known for years that this moment would come. Each struck the other, and they fell together, and then Surtur raised his sword high. The fire roared upward, devouring the sky, sweeping across the realms. Asgard's walls turned to molten rivers, Midgard's forests to ash, and when the flames met the sea, the waters rose in a single, immense wave that drowned the burning world. The 9 realms were gone. The age of the Aesir was over. The fire did not last forever. The sea, once risen high enough to drown the world, began to fall. Slowly, the charred bones of the earth appeared again. Where ash had smothered all, green shoots began to push upward. The air was quiet, the light softer than it had ever been before. From Yggdrasil, though much of it had fallen, 2 humans emerged, Leaf and Lifthraiser. They had hidden themselves deep within the trees, sheltered during the end, sustained by dew and shadow. Now they stepped into the new light, their hearts beating in time with the pulse of a newborn world. They were alone, but not for long. Life, as it always does, began again through them. Their children's children would spread across the land, filling it with voices and footsteps once more. And they were not the only survivors. From the ruins of the old god's realm came 6 figures. Vidar and Vali, the sons of Odin. Magni and Modi, the sons of Thor, who now carried Mjolnir. And from the shadows of the dead returned Balder and Hodder, walking together in peace. These 6 stood on the plain of Edavil, where once had been Asgard's golden halls. They spoke of the old world and of the new, of what to keep and what to leave behind. They found the golden game pieces once used by the gods in times of leisure, and they smiled, though the smile was tinged with memory. A new sun rose, daughter to the one swallowed by the wolf, her light warm but not harsh. The rivers cleared, the forests thickened, and the mountains held their shape again. The cycle had turned, the old age was gone, and in its place, a quiet beginning. And so, the story settles. The gods have played their parts, the giants have had their day, and the world, stubborn and unbroken, has begun again. The air in this new dawn is different. It carries neither the weight of prophecy nor the scent of war. Instead, it smells of wet earth, of leaves freshly unfurled, of water moving gently over stone. It is the scent of something that has no memory yet. A blank page under the first stroke of ink. Lif and Lifthrasser walks slowly through this morning. There is no rush. The world is theirs to shape, but also theirs to know. They pause to watch a bird dip into a stream, its wings scattering droplets into the air. They feel the soft press of moss beneath bare feet. In these small things, life begins again. Somewhere, in the wide openness, the surviving gods speak quietly to one another. Their voices carry not in command, but in conversation of what has been lost, and of what might yet be built. Mjolnir rests at Magnus' side, not as a weapon, but as a memory of storms weathered. The sun lingers low, painting everything in gold. Shadows are soft here. They do not creep, but stretch lazily, like a cat waking from a nap. The wind drifts over the hills, unhurried, as if even it knows there is no need to hurry anymore. And far away, beyond the edges of what anyone can see, the roots of Yggdrasil hold steady in the dark, waiting for the slow turning of ages, for the day when another story, different, yet familiar, will rise to meet the morning. For now, the world sleeps with its eyes open, and you can rest with it.